Deploy a custom image. In this nugget, we talk about deploying a custom image, where we start off by talking about Windows image files, which are very flexible files which contain just about all of the Windows operating system. These can be manipulated and customized in a variety of different ways, and we can also work with another kind of a WIM file called WinPE. This is really not a file itself. This is the Windows pre-installation environment, and you can create an ISO file that loads this for you, and you can further customize that as necessary as well. We'll also take a look at some deployment tools. These are very critical for the 70-622 exam, so make sure you're very familiar with those. And then to give it all a sense of context, I'm going to do a deployment example for you, and you're going to see how I'm able to create a custom WIM file, and I'll do that by taking kind of a snapshot, if you will, of an existing installation of Windows, and then we'll apply that. Once we've saved it out to a custom WIM file, we'll apply it to a bare metal installation so you can see how that works. And then we'll also show you how you can reduce your level of manual intervention by creating an auto110.xml file, which is really beyond our scope for this course, but I do want you to be aware of it, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to create that file and what kind of tools we use to work with it. Did you ever see somebody who, on first glance, might not have looked all that impressive, and you might not be able to expect all that much out of them, only to find out later, wow, you underestimated that person. They were able to do more than you thought. It's kind of like that at our kids' high school, my kids' high school. There's a football player there who's shorter than me, and I'm pretty short. I'm pretty short. I'm only 5'9", and this kid's quite a lot shorter than me, but somehow or another he managed to get his way on the football team, and this kid really performs. He's a very fast runner. I don't know how those little legs run so fast, but once he gets the ball, man, he can really charge down the field. Well, it's kind of like that with Windows Vista as well. You look at one little thing, and you might say, well, what's the big deal there? We're looking right now at the Windows Vista DVD. And as we take a look at this, really, we see several different files as you would expect to see on an operating system installation DVD, but really, most all of the operating system that you install when you're installing Windows Vista is that one little file right there. Now you can see down here, it's not really all that little, but it really is one file. It's 2.24 gigabytes. But almost everything that you have in your Windows Vista installation is included in that one file, regardless of which version of the operating system you're installing. It could be Vista Home, could be Vista Business, could be Vista Ultimate, Starter Edition, and in fact, you can see down here underneath here, these are some kind of accompanying files. These are catalog files that go along with this install.wim file that govern what parts of Windows get installed and what features get turned on and turned off. But the key to the entire operating system really is this install.wim file, and that's really the whole operating system. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about here is what the WIM files are and why we want to use WIM files, what the advantage of them is, and why Microsoft decided to go with them instead of other conventional methods for installation that we've used in the past. And first of all, what does WIM stand for? That stands for the Windows Imaging Format, which is the new method Microsoft is using here. And one of the big advantages, and this is a short list, by the way, there's more than just this, but these are the main things. One of the big advantages is that the WIM files are hardware independent. You see, in the past, when we've installed XP or 2000 or any other operating system, a lot of times in corporations we use imaging software to be able to do that. Typically, it's going to be something like Ghost or an equivalent. And this means that we would just find a computer that was a representative sample of the kind of computers we would want installed in a department. We'd make sure that it had all the software it needed on it, all the configuration settings and so forth, and then we would snap an image of it. Maybe that was on a Dell computer. Well, then we go to the department and we find out, we got HP computers here, we've got some gateways, we've got some homemade computers that we keep, cobbled together ourselves, and the image that we try to apply doesn't always work on those other pieces of hardware, those other systems, and in fact, frequently what we will see happen there is you try to apply it, but it will blue screen you, or at the best, it'll just have a very unreliable performance. So that was not a good thing. You had to have then a separate hardware image for each one of the manufacturers that you had. Well, with a WIM file, you can use a one-size-fits-all kind of a deployment, because one WIM file will work on almost all different hardware. The only difference there is you do have to have a different image file for x86 or 32-bit operating systems versus 64. Other than that, you should be able to have pretty hardware-independent WIM files. And then these WIM files are very highly customizable as well. Now, of course, the one that's on the DVD is what it is. That's what we got from Microsoft. But what we can do is to copy that using a number of different methods to something like a distribution source that we can access over the network to deploy to our clients over the network, for example. And what we can do with that then is we can modify the contents of that WIM file, or we can modify how it deploys. We can modify the method that it deploys with by using a script or an answer file, and we'll take a brief look at that. I'll show you an example, and in fact, I'll make available for you an answer file that will fully deploy Windows for you if you want to use it. And then we'll also have a captured WIM method that we can use. This is where we can take an existing system. It's kind of similar at first to what we did with Ghost, where we would take a system that looked just perfect for what we wanted. We would, instead of ghosting that hard drive, we will use other tools to capture a WIM file of that computer, and then we will save it in a location where we can then later, if we want to, even modify it offline. We can crack that image file open, we can add or subtract files to it, add drivers to it if we want to, for example, all kinds of things like that. So we've got lots of flexibility with that. We get all the advantages of an image file that we might have used similar to what we had with Ghost, but we can apply it to a bunch of different computers because it's hardware independent. And when we start the installation, we can do what we call a light touch installation. There's also a zero-touch installation. A light-touch installation can use answer files or scripts. A zero-touch installation has to use SMS or SCCM. And it's quite beyond our scope for our current topic. But anyway, we can then, again, like I said, also use offline modifications there. And you can have more than one WIM file. Now, remember the size of that WIM file was what? 2.2 gigabytes? Well, if I have several different modifications of my highly customizable WIM file, and some have different modifications made offline than others, for example, well, I don't want to have, if I have 3 WIM files, I don't want to have 6.6 gigabytes of hard drive space chewed up with those 3. Well, with single instancing, what can take place is that it does not duplicate the disk space between the 3 of them. It only adds disk space for any files that are unique between the images. And it also provides for us, a WIM file provides for us a non-destructive deployment. This means that, unless I format the hard drive, if I apply a WIM file to install the operating system onto a hard drive, and it already had maybe an additional folder on there with some files in it, it does not destroy all of those existing files. The only thing it will destroy is it will overwrite other files in the same folder that are already there. So if there's already files in the same folder that the installation wants to use, then it will overwrite those files with the operating system files. But anything that's not part of the default, or any files that are not already there in the operating system WIM file, it will not overwrite, and it will allow them to remain on the hard drive. Let's also take a look here at another key component to the Windows Vista installation, and that's the Windows pre-installation environment, which we usually just refer to as WinPE. This is kind of a miniature operating system that you see when you boot from the Windows Vista DVD, or you make a connection over a network and you start an installation. Anytime you start the installation for Vista, you'll see this graphical user interface load that gives you a nice little next finish that you can perform the installation from. This is a miniature operating system necessary just to boot and to give you enough of an interface to be able to load an operating system. And that's what its main purpose is to install the operating system. Now, another thing you can do with this, besides just installing the OS as if you were to do it manually from the DVD, is you could also use WinPE to capture an operating system. Much like I mentioned a little while ago, where we get our master computer and we want to capture an image from it, we can use the WinPE environment to be able to do that. We can also use WinPE to troubleshoot an existing installation. So, for example, if I'm having boot problems with my operating system, I can boot to a WinPE environment and be able to analyze it outside of booting the Windows Vista operating system itself. I can kind of get outside of it and look into it without having to actually load the OS, which might not be able to load anyway if you're having boot problems. And this file that's used is actually, I think I've got it right here, again on your sources directory on your Windows Vista DVD. It's called boot.wim. Again, it's a Windows imaging file, and this is a much smaller one than the install.wim. This one's only about 116 megabytes. But what it does, again, is it loads and it provides for you a graphical user interface with which you can continue your installation. It's also capable of being a networked boot.wim file. It includes already many common network drivers, so there's a pretty good chance that just by booting this, you'll be able to be on the network already. And if you have something like a DHCP server available, or a dynamic host configuration protocol server is what they're called, then it can automatically dole out an IP address to this computer when you just boot it off of the DVD, for example. So that works out pretty well. And then what happens with this is it loads itself into a RAM disk. And it's usually going to be drive X, unless you're able to somehow manipulate that or change it. But most of the time we don't. And it will load itself to a RAM disk. This means then that it does not copy files immediately to your hard drive, thereby complicating the installation process. And instead, the RAM disk and the actual physical hard drive are treated completely independently. Now here I've made available for you a deploymenttools.pdf document that'll be available up on nuggetlab.com. And the reason why I've made this available is because you do need to know the basics of these tools for the 70-622 exam. You don't need to know every single aspect of all of these tools and every little trick and tip that you can use for every single one of them. For those kinds of things and for in-depth deployment processes, you'd need to know details more related to the 70-624 exam, which is being recorded by Rhonda Layfield, who's one of only 4 MVPs for Microsoft. And an MVP is someone that Microsoft considers an expert in that field. And she's one of 4 United States MVPs that really is really hot on this topic of image deployment for Windows Vista. And I'm not trying to sell you more video, by the way. I'm just telling you that she is recording that 70-624 Series 4 CVT nuggets. You can use other methods if you want to. Microsoft has decided not to even make a book available for the 70-624. Some of the other exams, they do that sort of thing. But for the 70-624, I think they realize what a huge can of worms these deployment tools are and how counterintuitive it all is. There's over 1,000 pages of white paper you could download on this, and there's a few hundred pages in the Windows Vista Resource Kit. The problem is it gets to be too much information for most people, and you get to a point where you can't see the forest for the trees, and you make it a full-time job. In fact, Rhonda made it a full-time job to study deployment for Windows Vista using light touch and zero-touch installation methods. She studied this for 6 months as a full-time job, so it's a pretty huge topic. But for our exam, we just want to look at these tools, and I'll briefly identify these and how we use them, and then I'll demonstrate some of them for you as well. So briefly, let's start with ImageX. This is one of the key tools that you'll use to manipulate your WIM deployment images. You can use it to capture an image, for example, to capture your master computer. You can use it to modify an existing WIM image, or you can also use it to apply a WIM deployment image. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and this is one of the tools that you will definitely need to know for the 70-624 exam. Now, once you boot your WinPE image, you might come into a situation where you find out, oops, I don't have all the drivers that I need. Maybe you're trying to access a RAID controller of some kind. You don't have the drivers for it. You're trying to access the network, but you realize you don't have network drivers installed. Well, once you've booted your WinPE image, you can use the DRV load item. These are all command line tools, by the way, except for one of them. You can use DRV load and then manually load the driver after the fact. But that's a little bit cumbersome. It's much better if you can load the drivers in the actual image itself, and I'll talk about that as well. There's WDS Capture. This is what you can use to capture an image and then upload it to a Windows deployment server. It's similar to ImageX, except that WDS Capture is mostly used for Windows deployment services. And this is the replacement for RIS, or Remote Installation Services. This is a service that Microsoft makes available that we normally put on a server, and then you can boot your clients. They might not have any operating system on them at all, for example. You can boot them from their network card. They have to be configured in BIOS to be able to do that, and then it will download an image from that WDS server. And these would be images that more than likely you will have manipulated and customized and so forth. Again, this is probably going to be a lot more tied to the 70-624 exam than our existing one. And then the WPE util command. This is something that will allow us to initialize the network, shut down or reboot WinPE. enable or disable the firewall, and configure the language settings. And that's really not something we work with an awful lot in the 70-622 exam, but there it is for you if you need to know what it is. Now this one we probably will be using more in the 70-622, and that's the OSCD image. This is something that we use to create a WinPE ISO file. One thing that's pretty cool about the new methods for booting and everything and for using WinPE is I could create an ISO file that's customized for my own purposes, and then I could put it on a DVD or something like that and boot it wherever I wanted to throughout my organization. In fact, we normally associate ISOs with CDs or DVDs, but I can even create my own customized WinPE file that I can put on a USB flash drive, and I can boot from that flash drive if I want to. And I kind of like that idea because it will boot faster, and it usually gives you faster access time than a CD or a DVD. Then there's the PE image file. This is something that I actually had to use here because I did not have drivers within Windows, VMware to be able to boot to the network. So I created and customized my own WinPE image file, and I added in my own drivers in addition to that. So I just cracked open an existing WIM file, and then I added in VMware network drivers to that, and I was able to use it thereafter. Then there's the BCD edit file. This is something that we can modify the boot configuration data store. Again, we don't see a lot of that on the 622 exam, but here's the information for you if you ever need it. We do have different boot methods than we've had in the past. For example, we don't have the venerable boot.ini file anymore, so we'll need to use instead the BCD edit tool to modify our boot processes within Windows Vista. And if you have multiple operating systems, maybe you're dual booting between XP and Windows Vista, then this is what we can use to set up our boot preferences in a multi-boot environment. We can also use copy PE. This is going to copy WinPE files to a directory for building a custom, for purposes of building a custom WinPE ISO file. And this is what I had to do in conjunction with PE image. First thing I had to do was to copy my WinPE files to a directory, and then I custom modified it by adding in the drivers that I needed for PE image for VMware so that I could boot to the network there. And then this is a tool, as I mentioned earlier, that all these are command line tools except for one, and that is sysprep. Sysprep can be used either from the command line or a graphical user interface. And if you just type sysprep from a command line in the right directory, it will launch a UI for you if you want to. The purpose of this is with imaging, and this is true of Ghost or any other kind of an imaging process. If I snapshot an image of a computer, well, it's got a unique computer name. It's got a unique IP address. It's got a unique GUID. It's got a unique SID or system identifier and everything. Well, you can't have two computers with supposedly the same unique information on the network. So that would cause identity problems within Windows, within Active Directory, within the network environment, and so forth. So sysprep strips away the unique characteristics of an image, and then you snapshot that image, and then when you restore it to other computers, they will self-generate their own unique information, such as their own unique SID and so forth. So the best way to show you a lot of these tools that we'll be working with is to just have a tools deployment example. With this, what I'm going to have happen is I'm going to have a master computer here, and I'll just put M for master. And this is going to have all the applications and configuration just the way I want it. And in other words, I want to take this master, and I might want to deploy it exactly the way it is to hundreds or thousands of other computers within my environment. But what I need to do with that is to capture that image, and then I'll store it usually on a network drive of some kind or a network server. Okay, I'll put S for server here, for example. And then what I want to do is to take that image that's been stored on the server and deploy it to multiple other computers here. Okay? So that's the whole idea of what I'm about to do. In order for me to be able to do this, to get started with this whole process, I need to have a WinPE CD, and I'll show you how to create your own WinPE CD, and it'll generate an ISO file that you can then use some third-party ISO burning software to create your CD with. Then what I'll do is I'll make sure that my master computer, in other words this computer, is prepared properly. So first of all, I'll make sure that it's got the applications I want, that it's got any custom configuration settings that I want, any additional files, drivers, and the like. And then I'll use sysprep to give it uniqueness. Because after all, remember as I said earlier, I'll have a SID associated with this master computer as well as other unique information. I can't have all these computers have that same SID because that'll cause Active Directory problems among other things. And then what I want to do is, once I've got this all configured properly, I'll take this WinPE CD that I created in the first step, and I will boot from that CD that I created earlier. Once I've done that, it will take me to a WinPE command prompt, and I'll be able to use the command tool from the WinPE CD called ImageX, and I'll use this special command that I can use to capture that entire hard drive into my own custom WIM file. And then if I want to, I can copy that WIM file up to a network drive or something like that. And there's some flexibility there, by the way. Generally, we copy them up to a network drive, but if I've got a pretty big flash drive, like I've got a USB flash drive that's 16 gigabytes, that's usually big enough to hold an entire hard drive, so I could copy it to that and then put it in my pocket and, and then transport it to some other location if I want to. So those are all certain possibilities. In fact, it's not on our exam, but you can even use ImageX to split up a hard drive onto multiple readable media, like CDs or DVDs if you want to. And then to continue this, once you've put that image file on a central location, again, it's normally going to be a network drive, then I take my boot WinPE CD, which again I created in step 1, and this time instead of using it on the master computer, I use it on the target computer, like maybe I have a bare metal install. I boot off of that, and then I use utilities such as diskpart. This is a very important utility. ImageX particularly and diskpart particularly are very important for the 70-622 exam, but using diskpart, I can then select a disk and I can clean it, meaning that I'll just wipe it out, and then I'll create a partition. Then I also need to make it an active partition so that it's bootable, and I'll show you all of this. Then we have ImageX, and then I would apply it. Once I've created my partition properly, I'll use ImageX and I'll apply my WIM file that I've created from the master machine, and I'll apply it to my target machine, and then after a reboot, I'd have a brand new computer. Alright, so here I am on a server where I've already downloaded and installed the Windows Automated Installation Kit, and you can see that right here, Microsoft Windows Automated Installation Kit, where it gives you certain documentation, and in this case what I'm interested in is the Windows PE Tools command prompt, which really does nothing more than set some environment variables and then take me directly to the path location where these tools will be, and if I do a dir, you can see that there's several of the tools that I had talked about earlier. Now the one I'm interested in running right now is this copy PE.cmd file. What my purpose here is that it's going to copy all of the tools that are necessary for the WinPE CD into a given directory. So I'll do copy PE.cmd, and then I'll specify a location, and I'll specify also an architecture, because I can do this for AMD 64 or x86, and in this case I'm going to do x86, probably because that's still more than likely the most commonly used architecture, even though I like 64 a bit better myself for performance reasons. And then I'm going to put it in a directory here, and I'll just call this WinPE. Now, Microsoft has you go like this, WinPE, and then underscore something like x86. I don't like to do that. What I like to do is I just create a WinPE, and then I break it apart according to architecture. So I'll put a separate subdirectory for my x86, and then I'll have another subdirectory for AMD 64 and the like. So now once I've typed that in, I simply press enter, and it's going to create the directory. It hadn't been there before, but it creates it as part of this command, and then it copies all of the files into that directory for me and makes them ready to go. Now, once this is done, I want to point something out here. I think I mentioned earlier that it copies ImageX for you. The reality is it doesn't. You'll have to copy that yourself. But let me show you what I'm talking about here. If I go to Windows Explorer, we'll see that it's created the appropriate directories that I wanted it to create. So we should see that on the C drive, which is where I put it that. And there's the WinPE. And then there's the architecture directory underneath here. And then what's important in this is a couple of things. Number one, there's the WinPE.wim file. Okay, so that's what's going to be able to contain basically the installation environment for me, but I also have this ISO directory. Now notice there are no ISO files yet. What we're going to do later on is to create a command that will generate an ISO file for us out of whatever the contents are of this. And all these contents are going to be on the ISO file. One thing I am missing is the ImageX command, so what I'll need to do is to copy that tool directly over to it. And then to make things cleaner here, I went ahead and cleared the screen and typed in the command that we'll be using. We're going to copy the ImageX file in this path statement that you see right here, and I had to put it in quotes because we have spaces in the path. And then I'm going to copy it to c:\WinPE \x86 \ISO, and I'm putting it into that directory. Press enter and we see one file copied. Sure enough, there's our ImageX command now. Now, a little bit later on, when we use ImageX to capture our master computer's hard drive, when we do that, we don't want it to compress certain files, and we don't want it to copy certain files into the image destination. Let me show you what I mean by that. Here, let me just minimize this. And I've gone ahead and created a file that will help control that for us. You'll need to know about this. This is called wimscript.ini, and if I crack it open, we can see some example text that I've put in here. So, for example, what files do I not want to be included? That would be in my exclusion list section here. And these would be files that are unique to that specific computer, but are not useful on destination computers when I apply this master image to all of the destinations. For example, the page file is unique to each individual computer. The NTFS log file, the hibernation file, which is what's used for, on a lot of laptops, for example, when you close the lid, it might go into hibernate. That's what that is. The recycle bin information, and so forth. This, for example, this CSC is the client-side caching for offline files. Then there's the compression exclusion list. You must be aware of this section here as well. And I've given some examples here. The reason why I don't want ImageX to take the time and effort to compress these types of files is because they're already compressed, and it would be kind of a wasted effort. So zip files, for example, they're already compressed, or cabinet files, MP3 files, MPEG files, and the like. And you see several other examples there. And you can add your own to that if you like, for different files that your company might use that are also already compressed. So then I would take this wimscript.ini file, and I will copy that, and then I'll put it also into this ISO directory, and then it will follow the instructions in this wimscript.ini in terms of what to exclude and what to compress or not compress. Now, the only other problem I've got right now is that, look at this ISO directory. This is the contents of what I want in my ISO file, but I don't have an ISO file yet. So what I need to do is to set out a command, specify a command that will collect all of this stuff that's in this directory and generate an ISO file, which would then pop up in this directory. Okay, so the ISO file that I create collects all of this, plops it into the one directory above it as an ISO, and here's the command that will do that. OSCD image -n means to allow long file names. -b specifies the boot file, etfs boot. Okay, and by the way, this might just be me, but I always want to say, and I always want to type EFTS, but it's ETFS, so just watch your spelling on that. And then c:\WinPE x86 ISO, this tells it where it's going to get the contents of the ISO file that it's about to create. It's going to derive it all out of this directory, and it's going to create this ISO file in the x86 directory up above. So now I'm going to go ahead and press enter. We're going to see that it's going to start creating the ISO file out of this contents, and then when it's done, we'll be ready to have an ISO file to work with. And so now we see that it has completely copied and created this ISO file. At this point, I'd be ready to burn it to a CD or a DVD, boot from it, and then capture from an existing installation, or point it to a WIM file and deploy it to a bare metal installation, for example. So now we're pretty much ready to go with this ISO. Now that would be the case for most of you. In my case, I'm going to go out of scope here a little bit, give you a little bit of bonus material, and it might be very handy for you. You see, the problem with me right now, well, I have many problems with me, but the problem technically here is that I'm using VMware. You see, Windows does not include any VMware drivers for the network cards, so I'm going to be a little bit at a point where I will not be able to actually fully use all the tools I'm about to show you, especially if I'm trying to deploy an image across a network, because I won't have any way of connecting. The key here is that, remember, when it generates this ISO file that I just showed you, and there it is, it does so out of this ISO directory. This is the contents of that ISO file. Everything that we see in here. The key thing that's missing the VMware network drivers is the sources directory where there's the boot.wim file. This does not have network drivers for VMware, although I'm sure it does for a bunch of other network cards. So what I need to do is I need to crack this open using a special tool, and then I'm going to be able to add the VMware drivers to that location, and then I'll package it all up again into a bootwim again, and then next time I create an ISO file, this will now contain the VMware drivers that I need. And by the way, in order to expose those VMware drivers and make them available to me, and I copied them up here, in order to get these available to me, I went to a virtual machine, doesn't matter which kind, XP, any Windows operating system, and then there's an option in the menus to install VMware tools. I chose that option, but I did not actually install them. I just went to the CD that it mounts kind of a virtual CD, and then you can see all these files there, and then I just copied them from there out to kind of a neutral location, in this case just this directory here, and now I'm ready to work with them and to inject them into my own custom boot.wim file. Now then what I need to do is to take this boot.wim file and extract it to another directory of my choosing. I already created a folder here called mounted.wim, so that's where I'm going to be able to go ahead and put that. So from the command line here, let me clean up a little bit, I'm just going to type in what I need to be able to make that happen. And so then here's the command that I'm going to be running. I'm going to run imagex with the /mount rw, specifying that I wanted to export the contents of my boot.wim file in a manner that they will be readable and writable. So that's the RW part of that. And then this just simply points to that boot.wim file that I'm interested in. This identifies the first image in the boot.wim because I haven't really mentioned it, but you can store multiple images in a single WIM file. And that's something that's going to be a little bit more related to Windows Deployment Services, but certainly the possibility exists there in install.wim as well as boot.wim. But I'm pointing it to the first image in there, and then I'm going to point it to /images mounted WIM. That's going to be the destination where it's going to extract the contents of the boot.wim file, allowing me to read, write, and modify the contents. So right now we see that in the mounted WIM there's nothing there. As I run this command, however, we're going to see it mount this boot.wim file in an RW fashion. And if I refresh the screen here, we now see that the mounted WIM folder has those contents, so it's now ready to modify. Now here I've just changed to this directory so I don't have to keep typing in that whole path every time I access a tool from out of there. Here I'm using PE image, which is what I'm going to use to inject the appropriate driver files into my mounted WIM. And here I'm going to specify that I have an INF that I'm trying to work with, and the INF is located in images, VMware Net Drivers, /vmxnet.inf. That's the INF file associated with those drivers, and I want to put that into the images mounted WIM Windows directory. So I'm just going to go ahead and go with this, and I'll press enter, and we'll see that it is now installing the vmxnet.inf, which points to the proper drivers, and it'll copy all the files that it needs to in that directory. Now in this particular case, there's actually also another INF that I need to copy over there, or to reference. So I'm going to go ahead and put that one in here as well. And that one is the vmware-nic.inf. I'm going to go ahead and press enter here, and we're going to also install that package. And then once that's done, all I need to do now is to go ahead and unmount this, and I also have to remember to commit my changes. So then here I've gone ahead and just changed directories to the location where my imagex command is, and I'm going to /unmount, which clears out that directory, but I also want it to go ahead and commit the changes. So what's it going to do? It's going to clear all this out, it's going to delete all of this, but it's also going to commit the changes back into the WIM file that I originally specified, and that's what this one right here, /images mounted WIM. So I'm pointing it to the appropriate directory, and the imagex command just knows which images are already mounted. I don't have to specify the exact WIM file. It just knows it. So I'll just press enter here. It's unmounting now the mounted image that was in this location. And it's also committing the changes. If you forget this / commit, then all the work that you have done will be wasted. You'll discard all the changes. So make sure you got the commit. Now that I've done that, it will have the mounted image with the proper contents as necessary now, containing the network drivers. So then, now that I've got all those drivers in there, I'm ready to go back to my OSCD image, and this is the same command that I showed you earlier, although I now realize, I don't think I mentioned this, the -B, which points to this boot file, there's no space after it. It's just kind of strange because most Microsoft switches and command line utilities, anytime you specify something like a hyphen or a -N or a -B or whatever else it is, there's usually a space after it, but in this weird case, there's not. So again, it's going to point to the etfsboot.com file, and it's going to point to this location. So it's going to point to the contents here. Any of the contents in that directory are going to be sewn up into this single ISO file, which will now contain all the stuff that we're supposed to have in it. So here we go. It's going to take this all the contents of this ISO, including this new boot.wim that has our network drivers in it, and it should put it into an ISO file, which we see right here. And it's not quite done yet, but it's already created the file name. So anyway, while it's doing that, let me just point out again, this is not the stuff where I insert the network drivers is not stuff you have to know for the exam, but it is very good practice, at least in following what I was doing here, and I think that'll help you in the long run if you at least follow along. To reiterate, for our purposes, you do need to understand the purposes of the WAIK or the wake, the WinPE-CD, what that's for. You need to understand copype.cmd. Remember, that's what created the directory structure for us in the first place. And also the WimScript.ini file, which excluded certain files as well as excluded which files to compress. And again, OSCD image, which is what I'm working with right now. Alright, so let's go back to this slide that we were looking at earlier in our tools deployment example, and I cleaned it up a little bit here. But just so that we can see where we're at the first step where we created a WinPE-CD, and in our case, I also added in some custom network drivers and recreated the ISO file. Once that ISO file has been created, I also need to make sure that my master computer is prepared so that I can capture an image from it, capture a WIM image from it. Here I've got my applications installed, any other configurations that I want to have installed, and I need to then sysprep it. Now here is the machine that I'll be working with, Vista Client 01. Remember, it's one of those that I've already worked with in the past. You see that I've still got my custom toolbars there, for example. And you can see that Microsoft Word is installed in this computer. So it's already a configured system that I want to work with. The next thing I want to do is to go to the sysprep directory, and you can see where the location is here. And I want to run the sysprep command. Now we can do that from the command line, or we can use a graphical user interface. Either one should work just fine. And so here I've simply gone to the appropriate directory. I've typed in sysprep, and what this would do then, if I just press enter now, is it will open up the UI for sysprep. I can also do a / question or / question mark, and it shows you all of the help. You do have user account control with this, so you have to option that. And then it shows you all the variable options that are available for you here. You should know these for sysprep, and I'm going to explain these as we go here. In fact, I'm going to use the most commonly used ones next. If I do sysprep like this, again, it shows up the graphical user interface, and the one that's most commonly used for our purposes is the UBI, or the out-of-the-box experience. And then what that's going to do is, once we do that, and we also click on Generalize in my case, and if I were to click OK and then reboot this system, what would happen is I would then capture the image using my WinPE-CD, and I would use ImageX to be able to capture this entire computer that we're looking at here. Once it's been captured into a WIM file, it will then be applied to a destination computer or a target computer, and then when it starts up, it will give us the out-of-the-box experience, meaning that it will give us the Welcome to Windows screen and other things that you'll normally see when you first start up Windows for the first time. The Generalized checkbox is what kind of neutralizes this system and strips away the unique identifiers such as the SID. And then the shutdown options explain themselves pretty well, except that for me, I usually use the shutdown option because a lot of times if I hit reboot and I don't realize how long this is taking, and then I look away for a while, or I start daydreaming, sometimes that happens, believe me or not, it does. If I start daydreaming, then it's already rebooted before I had a chance to use ImageX to capture the machine or anything, and then I've blown it, so I got to start over again. So I try not to use reboot unless I'm pretty sure I'm going to be right on top of it. Now I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this for the time being because I'm going to show you what I usually do also from a command line, sysprep, and then I'm going to do ubi, and then generalize. And this is going to do the same thing, and I'll just also do a shutdown. And press enter. And then we'll choose to continue, and that's pretty much it. Sysprep is now working. It's cleaning things up, and it's getting the system ready. And when it's done, it'll shut the system down. And then, I'm just going to go ahead and show this to you while I'm thinking about it. Within VMware, I've already pointed to this path for the ISO file. And you don't need to memorize this or the way this looks or anything like that. I'm just pointing out that I am using kind of a virtual CD because VMware has the ability to use a physical CD, or I can point it to an ISO file like you can see I've done here. And where I've pointed it to is my server that I was working with earlier where I created that ISO file. So upon reboot, it's going to be able to then access that particular CD, and I'll be able to boot to it as necessary. So right now I'm at this stage where I'm ready to boot from the WinPE CD that I created in step 1, which in our case also includes the network drivers. So I simply start this virtual machine by pressing the little button over there. And now what's going to happen is it's going to power on as if it were a physical machine, and it will point to that ISO file. So now we see here that it is booting from that ISO file, and it's going to take just a moment here. I think it should say it's loading. There it is. It says it's loading the files down here, and I'll give that just a moment to finish loading. And so you can see here that it's gone ahead and booted to a command prompt. I've changed to the E drive, which is the CD-ROM, which contains the ImageX utility. I'm going to specify /compress that I want maximum compression. That'll save me more hard drive space. You can also choose other options such as no compression or fast, which if you want some compression but you also want it to perform quickly. I'm okay with maximum, and then I'll do a /capture because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to capture the entire drive C right here, and I'm going to save it into a file called vistamaster.wim. And you can call it whatever you want to. That just makes sense to me. Then I'm going to give it a description, quotation, because there's spaces in it, master image of Windows Vista, end quote, space /verify, just to confirm the integrity of this image file that it's about to create. So then I press enter, and we see that it is now starting to scan. There's the files that I told it to exclude earlier because of my file that I specified as well. The winscript.ini file. Wow, you probably have no way of realizing this, but that took forever just now. It probably was, maybe an hour and a half to create this image. And I just paused recording so I didn't have to watch me wait for an hour and a half. I mean, I took a break. I went to the store. I deposited a check. Went to the kitchen and had a snack. I took a nap, a longer one than usual. I mean, I did just about everything, and finally, this thing got finished. So now we're ready to go ahead and take this image and put it elsewhere. If I go to my C drive and do a dir, we'll see that we do have this vistamaster.wim file that's been created, and it's quite a large file. Now what I might want to do is to take this and copy it to a network resource. Yes, now then I'll simply enter in the netuse command to map a drive to the next available drive letter. That's what the asterisk is, and it goes to this server and this shared resource over there. And I'll just go ahead and press enter, where it'll prompt me for credentials. The username would be the domain of Nugget Lab, and then the username of trainer. And then I'm going to enter in my password, which is masked so you can't see me typing, and it maps drive Z as the next available drive letter. Now all I have to do is I'm going to dir to make sure I can get the spelling of this right, but I'm going to just copy vistamaster.wim to Z and press enter. And then it's going to take a while because it's over 2.5 gigabytes in size, but we'll go ahead and copy this over, and when it's done, we'll now have a WIM file that we can then apply to other machines. Alright, now here I've got a bare metal machine that does not have any operating system on it at all, and even though it says Windows Vista up here, that's not because it's already got Vista, it's because I want to install Vista here. So I just booted off of that ISO file that I had earlier. Again, this is the same one that has my VMware network card drivers, and what I want to do now is to use the diskpart command. You do need to understand the diskpart command, and I'll just type it here so you see it, diskpart. You need to understand this command well for the 70-622 exam, and Microsoft seems to favor this command for a lot of different things. Now, if you really want to do a light touch installation where you do a minimal interaction with the operating system to install it, then what you can do instead is to use an auto110.xml file, and I'll show you that in a while here, but you can use that to automatically partition your hard drive as necessary, but I'm just going to go here to disk part, and then I'm going to do a number of different commands, and these almost explain themselves, but I'll briefly identify them as we go. I want to select the first disk, so I'll select disk 0, because it uses ordinal numbering, and there's only one disk here. So it's select disk 0, that's the first disk. Once it's selected, I want to clean any partitions that are already on there, just in case I had something I want to start from scratch. And now I want to create a primary, partition, and the type I want to create is a primary partition, and I want its size to equal, and this is a 16 gigabyte drive, so I'm going to say 16,000. Okay, so create partition primary size equals 16,000. And then I want to go ahead and select the first partition. Now, it's kind of strange. The first set of numbering we used was ordinal, so the first item that you'll identify as item 0. Here, for selecting the partition, it doesn't use ordinal numbering, it just uses normal numbering, so now I've got to select partition 1 and not select partition 0. And I want to make that an active partition, which will allow it to be able to boot. Then I also want to format it. Okay, and then this will take a little while, but once that's done, I will then go ahead and exit the disk part command, and it will then be ready to receive the operating system. Alright, so while I'm waiting for that drive to format, let's catch up to where we're at in our steps here. We already did the boot WinPE, and then we did an image capture, and we have already done that, but we're also copying that file up to a network share, and it's up there by now. And here it is. There's our Vista master.wim, and remember, there's an images share that I sent that up to. Okay, so that's been copied up there now. And then the next thing that we'll do here is what we're doing now. We did boot WinPE on the target machine. That's what you just saw me doing, and then you just saw me running disk part on that target machine. So now our hard drive is completely prepared as necessary. My final step then will be to do an ImageX apply. Now this does look like a lot of steps, by the way, and it is if you're just doing this on an individual basis or for a home PC or something like that. But for a corporation, once you get that image up on the server and in the share, then you can apply that to all these other machines, and you can do an ImageX apply across a large department or something like that. And it's not quite so bad when you average it out across multiple desktops. So here we are. We have completely formatted our volume, and we're ready to proceed. And the next thing I've done here is I've gone to drive D, which is where ImageX is, because it's on the CD, remember. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a ImageX/apply. And I want to apply this WIM file, and I want to apply the first partition or the first image in that WIM file to my drive C here. So now I'll just go ahead and press enter, and it will do this now across the network. Alright, now while it's copying all the information back over here, you see it's giving us a little countdown of what's going on. I want to point out something else to you here as well, and that is that, again, you do need to be very familiar with the ImageX command. Now, I took this directly from Microsoft Online Documents, so this gives you all the command line options that appear here, and I would be very familiar with just about all of these. They are pretty important. Microsoft's very proud of ImageX, so I'd be familiar with what each one of these does and what its usage is. This is also available for you as ImageXCommands.pdf up on NuggetLab.com. Alright, so now we have successfully applied this image. The next thing I'll do here is to use the command wpeutil reboot. Now, I didn't really use that before. I didn't really have to, but I can also use the same command, and Microsoft kind of recommends it. When I snapped the image of my Vista Master, I could have concluded that with wpeutil shutdown. In this case, I'm just going to reboot, and the reason for that is that I'm going to go ahead and see what happens when it starts back up again, and you're going to see that indeed it does provide for you an out-of-the-box experience where it asks you, what country you're in, and you can next through that. And it's not nearly as bad as doing a full setup, but it does give you do provide rudimentary information about your locale and the like, and activation and stuff, and then you'll have an operating system ready to go. Alright, so now we have our Windows Vista machine that has now successfully rebooted, and we can see that it's much like the introduction that you would get when you normally set up Windows. We just set up the country or region, hit next. And any user can do this. This is not really something that's particularly exhaustive or that requires a great deal of technical knowledge. Now here is one portion where you will have to have somebody enter in data. This can be bypassed by using an auto1attend.xml file that already has the product key inserted in it. And then you don't have to enter this in manually, otherwise you would see what we're seeing right here. So would have to enter in those product keys, and then I can choose to automatically activate when I'm online as well. In my particular case, I'm going to leave both of those empty, and when you do that with Windows Vista, you do get to use Vista for 30 days for free without having to register it or activate it. And so I can get by for a little while without not having to do either one of those things. But that's okay. And then we'll go ahead and click on Next. And then here we simply agree to the licensing agreement. You always got to click on that thing. And then you enter in the name of a user. And I'll just enter in the name of, how about Pam? Something like that. Pam seems like a kitty cat person, so we'll put in a cat. And then we'll go ahead and hit Next. And then that's pretty much it. We just simply select a background for this user if they want one specifically, and we can enter in a computer name for them. I'm just going to leave it as is for right now. And then I'll set up the protected settings a little bit later as well. Time zone and the like, and I think you see the rest. Then I can enter in which kind of a network I'm on. I'm currently on a workplace network. So I'll click on that and start, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Now I get my desktop background that I selected, and we'll see that once I get a start menu here, I'm going to demonstrate that we do also have all of the software that was installed with this original image as well. Alright, so now we see here that the user has successfully logged on, and we'll see that we also do have Microsoft Office installed. Again, the advantage of snapping a Vista master like I used here earlier is that I don't have to reinstall Office. It's already installed as part of that image, and I'm saving myself a lot of work and having to go back through as a separate step and installing all the applications and configuration. Up to this point, you saw me go through a whole lot of preamble to be able to get to the desktop here. Remember, we had an option there right at the beginning where with the out-of-the-box experience, it looked a lot like Windows Vista always does when it first boots up, even during a normal installation. You specify your language and the product key and all those kinds of things. But administrators don't always want that right at the beginning because they might just be testing things out. They might just want to see if it boots properly, and they might realize, oops, I need to add some additional drivers or something like that. And if that's the case, then you can boot to audit mode. And what you can do with that is you can run sysprep, but instead of running the out-of-the-box experience, for example, you could instead run sysprep /audit. And what that allows you to do then, and this is useful for OEMs and corporations and so forth, is it bypasses all that Windows welcome screen stuff. And instead, now you can get directly to the desktop much quicker without having to go through all the preamble that we saw earlier. And then you can add additional device drivers, install applications, and test the validity of your application. Once you're then sure that it's got everything you want and you're done with audit mode, then you can run sysprep with a /OOBE again, like we saw earlier, and then make it ready to ship to the end user. Now then here I'm way beyond scope for our current exam, but I do want to point out to you that you can automatically set up Windows Vista using an auto1attend.xml file. This is useful for the light touch installation that I alluded to earlier. With this, what we do is we first of all point the Windows System Image tool, if I can show you the title bar here, Windows System Image Manager tool, and we point that to an installation or an image file that we can use. And here I just pointed it to the WIM file that we looked at earlier that I had already worked with. So if I select Windows Image File, that's the file that we'd been working with, so that's the one I pointed it to. And then what we do with this is there are various components of the Windows Vista installation process. Installation is actually a 7-step process, and some of these go to different corresponding components over here. So if I wanted to look at a certain portion of this in the deployment process, then what I could do is to just look at whatever might interest me here, and I'd right-click on it, and I can add it to one of the passes of the operating system installation process. Now, once we get to that, here's where we get actually to the point where we enter in data. So, for example, I could set up what language I wanted to use. So here it says x86 Microsoft Windows International Core. if I can read it all, WinPE neutral. So that would be Microsoft Windows International, International down here it is, Core Neutral, okay? And then when I go into this, the Setup UI language, and I right-click and I add settings pass to pass 1 Windows PE. By right-clicking here and choosing selecting on this, that's when it adds this component up here. Once it's done that, then I start to fill in the blanks, and these would then prevent me from having to manually intervene to fill in any of this stuff. So that's where all that comes from. This is, again, way beyond our current scope for the 622, but using this tool, you can come up with an automated answer file. But let me just show you some other examples of things you can use in this. For example, if I expand out, then we'll see that the Microsoft Windows Setup Neutral, when we added that in, we had a disk configuration here. It's only going to show us the user interface if there's a problem. We see the disk ID location here. We'll specify disk ID 0. We will wipe the disk. This replaces me having to use the disk part utility, because now the answers for all of that, including the disk ID and how many partitions and the size of the partitions and whether they're active, all of that stuff is now going to be included in the auto-unattend file. And you can see here that it is going to create a partition of, in this case, 8,000 megabytes, or in other words, 8 gigabytes. In our case, I would change that to probably 16,000 because that's what we used for our existing disk there. We can add, what order it's in, what kind of a disk it is. Is it primary? Is it extended? Whatever it is. So you can see all the different options that you have there. And then as I skip further down here, we see user data, and here I can, agree in advance to accept the end user license agreement. And then I enter in the name of the user and the organization. And then further on down here is where we would enter in the product key. And I'm not going to enter in my key here, but here you would just enter in whatever. It doesn't really say that by default. I added that in myself so that you would know that you can use that section to enter in your own product key. And this file will also be available for you up on nuggetlab.com. This should, once you enter in a product key there, all the rest should already be pre-configured to create an 8 gigabyte partition and install Windows on that 8 gigabyte partition. So this will be a really good starting point for you in working with this and in automating your setup process. Now, what do you do with this auto-unattend.txt file? A couple of things. Number one, to confirm that it's going to work, what you should do is to go to Tools and Validate Answer File, and then if it gives you a message down here, it'll tell you that there's some kind of an inconsistency with the file, or you need to fix something in order to make it fully automated. Once that's been done, however, and you're sure that everything is set up properly, and I'm going to go ahead and save this file right now, then what you'll see is that you'll have your auto-unattend.xml file, and that's just where I stored this one. You can edit this in Notepad if you want to, but it's probably easier to use the tool I just showed you. And then you can open it with Notepad and so forth, and then make further modifications to it if you want to. And we can see that here we now see it in Notepad, as I mentioned to you earlier. Okay. All right. Now, what you do with this file is you don't just leave it on your desktop. If you wanted to automate the installation, since we're talking about light touch installations, what I would do is I'd put it on a thumb drive or a USB flash drive, and then put that in a USB port on the computer that I'm starting the installation from. And even if I do a conventional installation from a CD, for example, this auto-unattend.xml file will answer all the questions for me, and I shouldn't really have to do much of anything else except for, come back after lunch, and now I've got a fresh install of Windows Vista with all the questions pre-answered for me here. Windows Vista installation does look for a file of this name in the root of any removable media. So I can also add this to my ISO file, for example, if I wanted to, and then I could custom create my own CD that had this auto-unattend.xml file in it, and then again, my installation should be fully automated. By the way, one reason why I'm giving this to you is because Microsoft does have documentation on how to create this that they say will work without any intervention whatsoever on your part. I've tested this out many, many hours, and Microsoft's instructions, in my experience, do not work. So I custom cobbled this together for you, and that should work very well for you in getting your fully automated installation with an LTI, or light touch installation. In this video, we talked about deploying a custom image. We started off with a discussion of WIM files, what they are, how they're very flexible, the different kinds of things you can do with them. And remember, these are files that are not hardware dependent, so you can take a WIM file and you can deploy it to various types of hardware. You can add additional files to them. You can crack them open and extract things out of them and so forth. It's a very, very flexible file type. And one of the WIM file types that we can use is one that loads the Windows pre-installation environment. We saw how I was able to add, for example, custom network drivers to that. We also took a look at several deployment tools. You need to be very familiar with those for this 70-622 exam. And we took a look at a deployment example to kind of tie it all together so you can see how all the pieces fit together. We created a custom .wim file, and then once we created it, we saved it to a network location, and then we applied it to a bare metal installation. Remember also, you can create and work with an AutoUnattend.xml file, which will help to reduce the manual intervention necessary during the setup process. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.